This is also an important story because the news poll this week wasn't all that favourable for the Morrison government. Prime Minister Morrison is a mile in front as preferred Prime Minister. These polls don't mean much, mind you. We're a long way out from an election, but they do indicate a prevailing mood, and quiet Australians, if that's the in phrase, are starting to say, well, not much that we want to happen is happening. Are electricity prices going down? How can they if we're not going to build a coal-fired power station? Not one, several. The drought will break. It will rain. Have we any capacity to harvest the water beyond what we had 5 or 10 years ago?
Or 50.
We certainly haven't built a dam or, no, that's right, or put in a pipeline. Parents pay heavily and hopefully for the education of their kids. But by international standards, our results are awful. Where has the machinery put in place to improve the results? And as you've just heard, government told the elderly they had this whiz-bang scheme to enable people to continue to live in their own home in retirement, home care packages. But guess what? For many, they don't exist. Remember earlier this year, massive floods in North Queensland. Devastation. The federal government made a song and dance about flood relief. Places in Townsville were wiped out. When I asked the Prime Minister what he was doing all these months on, he said, well, Alan, we've given the money to the states and that's their responsibility. And I said, Prime Minister, hang on. You mean the national government has no clout to make sure the money goes where it's needed? You see, like most governments, we're long on promises and short on delivery. That can be electorally damaging. Which brings us to deeming rates. These are the rates which affect the welfare entitlements of part pensioners and veterans. They enable the government, rightly, to deem financial investments, things like deposits in banks, shares, managed funds, to generate a particular rate of return. Currently, the deeming rate is 3.25% for people with investments of more than $51,000. But hang on, if their assets are cash on deposit at the bank, they're earning well below 2%. How is it fair to deem that someone is earning 3.25% interest on assets when if they think the safest investment, the one that won't worry them, is to stick their money on deposit in the bank and they're getting well below 2%? Now, earlier this year in July, the government announced a reduction in the so-called deeming rate. So from September 1, which is in 11 days' time, the higher deeming rate, if you've got more than $51,000 invested, will drop to 3%. And people with investments below $51,000 will be deemed to earn 1%. But Ian Henschke, the National Seniors Australia Chief Advocate, says the upper rate of 3% is too high, and it is. And he's accused the government of attempting to balance the budget, quote, on the backs of pensioners. Now, a lot of Australians, more than 1 million, I've got to tell you, have a stake in this. Ian Henschke joins us from Adelaide. Ian, good evening and thank you for your time.
No, thank you, and thank you very much for taking up this topic because I don't want it to be lost. And in fact, I want to give credit to Richo because he discussed this not all that long ago and we talked about it. And Richo, of course, was the person who came up with the deeming system that we've got today when he was the Minister for Social Security back in the early 90s. And he said quite categorically just recently that it was never meant to be a money maker for government. It was actually a help, if you like, for those people that had had a go and were trying to have a go. And now it looks like the government's having a go at them, because if you look at that figure of 3% and you think about all the people out there who've got money in their bank accounts where they're getting, as you say, Alan, they're lucky to get 1%, let alone 2% on the smaller amounts, and you have to put it in a term deposit. We know that pensioners are not going to go out and start playing the share market. And last Friday, I think it was about $90 billion was wiped off the share market. Now, is that what you want people to do when they're in their 70s and 80s, to be playing the share market when they can't even get a home care package?
Well, I'll come to that. It's
a ludicrous philosophy.
Yeah, I'll come to that in a moment. This is what Josh Frydenberg's saying, that in managed funds or superannuation or on the stock market, you'll get more than 3.25% and so on. But Ian is right. People are saying, well, look, I don't want to be involved in that. I don't want to be involved in that tumult and turmoil of that kind of investment. The bank is safe for me. I'm leaving my stuff at the bank. Just before we go any further, Ian, let me ask you this. Shouldn't there be some kind of independent, I was just saying to Richo off air before, an independent, transparent entity that determines the deeming rate? Not saying, oh,
Yes.
well, off the top of his head, the Treasurer has said, we'll give you a reduction on September 1. Don't we need something removed from government to determine this?
Exactly. And not only that, Alan, we need it for the pension, we need it for the deeming rate, and we need it for New Start. Now, they are three running sores and abject failures of policy by this government and previous governments. This is not just something that's happened overnight. I mean, there's a graph there that we can see, I think, at some stage, which will show you the deeming rate and the way that it's actually opened up over time. Now, that graph shows that it was actually under Labor back about 2010-12, where the deeming rate started to move away from the cash rate. Now, you can see what's going on there. Now, if this is a deliberate government policy that's been put in place, then be honest. Don't kid us. Don't try and tell us.
Ian, just to explain to our viewers there, the black thing there is exactly what I've been saying. So there's your cash rate, and look at the deeming rate. It's miles above the cash rate. And so, basically, people are being ripped off. I'll come back to your point when you introduced this in 1991. The government's making money, which, as you said, exactly what shouldn't happen.
That was not the intent.
No.
It was all about helping people, not helping government.
Ian, if I could give you a letter a bloke wrote to me, a listener, living in an aged care facility, and he gave me a direct example. He said he earned on his term deposit savings account $21,042, but the Department of Human Services, and they sort of manage all this deeming stuff, using the existing deeming rate, deemed he earned $38,690 in interest on his savings last financial year, and that affects then any entitlement that he has to a part pension. Because they've deemed he's earned this extra money, they cut his pension back. So and no one seems to worry about that. It costs this bloke, what he said, $2,000 a month to stay in the aged care facility, and that's taken directly off his bank account. But I don't know, look, Ian, I can't get through. I talked to Josh Frydenberg and he said, oh, you know, we'll put the money somewhere else and he can get a better return and all the rest of it.
Can I stop you there, Alan? I just want to stop you there. He talks about a suite of investments available to older Australians, a suite of investments. Well, it's not too sweet when the share market goes down by $90,000 million in a day, and when people are watching the predictions of a slowing of growth in the UK, in Europe. I mean, you've got Brexit happening, you've got problems in China, you've got all this, and you are telling older Australians to go out and get into a suite of investments. Oh, pull the other one. I mean, this is just ridiculous policy, and you're absolutely right. This original deeming rate was put in to be a help to pensioners, not to balance Josh Frydenberg's budget. And I can tell you what, there was a cartoon the other day that came up, and I want you to look at this cartoon because this is a warning to the government, a major warning. Now, this cartoon said, are deeming rates the new franking credits? Now, have a look at it. Have a look at that. So is the deeming rate a retiree tax too, or was that just the franking credits? It's hard to tell these days. Now, that is what we're being told by our members, and we've got a lot of them, and there are also a lot of us that watch your show and they listen and they actually know what's fair, and when they sit there and they see that and they say, well, is that the case? Now, it's not just the pensioners, it's the part pensioners, it's the veterans, it's the people that are on carers allowances, it's people that are on New Start. All of these people are affected by this deeming rate. Correct. It is a devil in the deeming, and it is going to be a devilish thing in the next election, and we will fight them all the way to the next election. Yeah, well, I tell you what, we are not backing down.
Let me just say one thing by way of clarification, that there are some investments that aren't deemed, so they don't deem your home or its contents, your car or your boat or your caravan, your antiques or your stamp or your coin collections. Ian, to just give the government some manoeuvrability here, do we need separate deeming rates? I mean, should there be a deeming rate?
Right.
Should there be a deeming rate, for example, for cash deposits and a deeming rate for things like super funds? Now, the Treasurer said super funds, managed funds and the stock market have provided strong returns beyond 3%, so that's different from cash at bank. Should there be a separate...
Look, this is smoke and mirrors stuff. This is smoke and mirrors stuff. Look, 40% of older Australians don't have superannuation. We know that, all right? So when he's talking about superannuation, look, Richo knows that. Superannuation came in, and most of these people don't have it. They want to keep their money in these accounts. It was originally designed that way. Richo designed it properly. Leave it alone. Get your hands off it. That's what they should be saying. Get your hands off it. And I tell you what, They tried to do this, Labor, by going after retirees, which is exactly what they did, and they lost the last election. Now, if this government doesn't wake up to the fact that they've got to fix these problems, now they're going to have a retirement income review. Matthias Cormann has already ruled out New Start as being part of the retirement income review. Now, I'll tell you something else that's happening in Australia at the moment. There are more than 200,000 Australians between the age of 55 and 65, because it's now retiree age is now 66. And now those people are chewing through their superannuation and they're chewing through their savings because we haven't got enough jobs for them. In South Australia last Friday, where I'm talking to you today, the unemployment figures came out and they were 6.9%. Well, guess what they are in New Zealand? 3.8%, the lowest since 2008. But this government is asleep at the wheel because there is a major problem happening. Older Australians are being pushed out of jobs. They're chewing through their savings. Others are being hit by these deeming rates, and they are not happy. And if they do not get this right in this retirement income review, there is going to be a huge backlash.
Yes,
now, I would like to see the government do something and start creating jobs. If you think the best welfare is a job, then have job programs for older Australians. Help them put money into their super.
Well,
don't punish people.
I've got to say on that, I'm getting letters now at the rate of 2 and 3 and 4 a day. People highly qualified, between over 60. No one will even answer.
Buckley's.
No one will even answer their job application. Is this the right signal, Ian, for government be sending to people to say, well, look, if you don't want to cop that kind of deeming rate at 3% because you're not earning 3%, well, look, stick your money in a riskier investment. I don't think that's a very comfortable signal to be sending to elderly people.
No.
Eh?
No, and look, you've got to remember too, I mean, I've said this before, I don't believe that the people in government today actually understand the minds of older Australians. I think they've lost touch with them. You know, you talk about the quiet Australians. Well, look, we represent the quiet Australians. National Seniors does. That's what we do. We hear their stories. We go and meet them. We talk to them. How often do you think some of these politicians actually go and actually talk to older Australians and actually find out what they're really worrying about? They wouldn't even be having this Royal Commission if it wasn't for people like National Seniors demanding that there was action for it, and also some of the horrific vision that was happening there. You just spoke to Ian Yates about the number of people that are actually waiting for a home care package. I mean, these are big issues, and the thing is, they're all interrelated. If you think about it, we live in an ecosystem, and that ecosystem, with the emphasis on eco-economics, is about the way that you structure the pension, the way you structure superannuation, how you pay for your aged care. All of those things are linked in together. And people losing their jobs in their 50s, people using up their savings, not having the money when they get to the pension age. It's all interrelated. And if they have this retirement income review, which Josh Frydenberg announced a week or so after the election, he hasn't even put out the terms of reference yet. So you have to ask yourself, are these politicians really concerned about policy, or are they just simply coming up with another review so that they can look at it? If they don't take action over the Royal Commission's recommendations in banking, then we're starting to worry about what will happen with the Royal Commission into aged care, and we're starting to worry about what will happen with the retirement income review. And it will be politically damaging for them if they don't.
We're talking about the cost of all of this. They can never find the money for this. This is for the elderly people who've paid their taxes all their life, worked their backsides off. But only this week we learned that there's 250,000 public servants in Canberra, and the wage bill is $158 billion. $158 billion. And you've got to say to yourself, if they're fashioning policy for government, what are they doing to earn that money? Can I just ask...
Can I just interrupt on one thing? Historically, those public servants have had a great advantage, because if you're in the public service for the federal, state or local government level, for a long time you're about the only ones getting superannuation.
And
We've got to remember that.
And it was a defined benefit. It was a defined benefit. You've got a multiple of final average salary.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you this, Ian? Surely pensioners, the least we can do is to let them know what goes into the decision-making process, instead of just having a treasurer, whomever he might be, making it up as he goes along. I want to come back to that earlier question. Do we need an independent body to provide some clarity?
We need an independent body, and look, other countries have it. I mean, I understand that in Canada, for example, these matters, particularly around the pension, are set by their equivalent of the ABS, you know, the Australian Bureau of Statistics. They have their own equivalent there. I mean, we can work out what is an adequate rate for the pension. We did this report here some time ago called The Adequacy of the Age Pension in Australia. People have looked at all of this. They've looked at what we actually need to do. And we've even had a report that was announced today by the actuaries in Australia, and they're suggesting ideas. What I find so upsetting at the moment is that there is a dearth of ideas coming from government, but people like ourselves and you, Alan, coming up with the idea of an independent body to set these things out, we're saying these things. I don't understand why they don't listen. Why can't you have an independent body set the deeming rate? Because it could be simply said it's going to be the RBA cash rate and then leave it alone. Yes. What we need in retirement is certainty, we need fairness, we need adequacy, and we need sustainability. There are simple concepts. Well, and the Alliance for a Fair...
There's one thing that you left out that I think you need. You need people to stop looking at this. You need people to just leave super alone. One of the great problems for people is that everyone's got an oar in the water. Every new government's got a great plan. Well, every bugger's got to stop having a great plan, and we have to just leave it at saying, right, this is the system, and let's stick to it.
Ian, I don't want to end this interview by increasing your blood pressure, but in response to a question that I asked the Treasurer as to whether we needed an independent body to provide some clarity in these decisions, you ready for this, Ian? His answer was, we think that the appropriate process is the current one.
Well, the current one, we don't even know how it works. And I'll tell you something else just quickly before we go about the pension. You always hear this story that older Australians are a drain on the economy. Well, there was a graph that came out today, which I think is the actuaries came up with, and they can show you this. And it actually shows that over the next 20 years, the number of people on the pension is actually going to go down because the number of full pensioners is going to drop. The number of part pensioners is going to increase. Now, have a look at that graph there. So why doesn't the government tell us the truth? The proportion receiving the full age pension has fallen from 80% to under 70%, and it will keep falling from 68 in 2018, which was last year, to 57% in 2038. The cost will be falling too from 2% of GDP down to around 2.5% of GDP in 2038. Now, this was a statement made the other day, by the way, backed up by Paul Keating, where he actually said that you can see what superannuation is doing. If you leave it alone and if you actually let it follow its course, we're going to have less of a drain on the economy. Yeah. And older Australians are not a drain. In fact, they're going to actually cost less in future. So this idea that somehow or other older Australians are a drain is rubbish. We also, older Australians, help their children, they provide volunteerism, they do all sorts of things that are good. And I want to see ageism end in this country, and I want to see people be treated fairly.
Good on you. Well, look, they're lucky to have you as an advocate. This is Ian Henschke, who's the National Seniors Australia Chief Advocate. And it's the classic case, really. Why doesn't government talk to people who know? I mean, I'd be just saying, come down and see me, tell me what needs to be done. They pretend that they know and they haven't got a...
Government always knows best.
Government always knows best. Ian, thank you for that. Ian Henschke, there is a man...
Very good.
Thank you.
What?
He's very good.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Yeah. You introduced the deeming rate and you messed it up.
I didn't mess it up. But people have been working for 25 years ever since to mess it up.